Welcome to the Money to the Masses podcast, putting you in control of your finances. One is an expert with years of experience giving free advice. The other owns his own microphone and can do the odd bit of editing. Here are your hosts, Damien Fahy and Andy Leeks.
Now, Damien, before we get on with this week's podcast, you had something quickly to say about our sponsors.
Yeah, we've got a new sponsor, Money Farm, and Money Farm are an online investment advisor and one of the biggest digital wealth management companies in Europe. So a big thank you to them for sponsoring the podcast. Now, Money Farm create portfolios to maximise long-term returns using ETFs to make incredibly cheap portfolios. And you even get the first £10,000 of your portfolio invested without any charge from Money Farm. And if you enter the code MTTM20K into the box when you sign up, you get the first £20,000 of your portfolio invested and run by moneyfarm.com without any charge.
Great stuff. On with this week's show. Hello and welcome to episode 94 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fahy and me, Andy Leeks. Damien, welcome back. What a monumentous week if you're British. We've got a British Grand Prix winner in Lewis Hamilton. We've got a British tennis player winner at Wimbledon in Andy Murray. And of course, we're going to have our second Lady Prime Minister this week. So what a week for the Brits, eh?
Well, it is all change, and the first two, brilliant. It's great. It's great for the Brits, and the latter, I think, well, hopefully it can be a positive. I mean, I like the idea that somebody's going to take charge. We felt a bit like rudderless, haven't we? We've had no real leadership, so I have no real opinion on Theresa May, but I just hope that we can now push on and push forward, so it could be something very positive. So it is a good week, actually, Andy. It's a very good week.
That's right. We don't really talk politics, but what I think is good for us being the Brits, is the fact that we're not going to have this period of uncertainty going on until mid-September. It's basically done and dusted now. We can move forward from here on in, which is great. So, yeah, good stuff.
I agree with you on that. And one of the things that we might as well kind of getting straight into the money stuff, it is good to have, what markets don't like is uncertainty. So any uncertainty you have around whether it's leadership or whatever's going on in the economy, they don't like. So they'd rather something was certainly bad or certainly good rather than just floating around between the two, so they can actually push forward. So having a leader is probably the only thing that's happened in the last 3 weeks after the referendum that has been something fairly decisive. Everything else has been in a complete state of flux and change, and we're probably going to still have more. I don't think any that's actually settled or done or dusted yet, even though people are feeling a little bit better. But on a positive, I think what we really needed and what hopefully we're going to get is some sense of, do you know what, this is where we are and we're going to push forward. I tell you what, on this subject, me veering off, I'm in the middle of reading a fantastic book. It's called Forgotten Voices, and it's the second one I've read in this series of books. Basically, it is the real accounts from people in the Battle of the Somme. So we're going back 100 years. So what they've done is the National Archives pulled together at the time real life accounts from the people who were fighting in the trenches and the people back home. And it's probably I read a similar book that was based around the whole of the First World War. I mean, it's very short. You can whiz through it in like a weekend, but it's one after the other, just like almost like diary entries, and it is brilliant in a kind of opens your eyes, very horrific, at some points touching. There's the bravery and all of these things all wrapped up, and you really got the sense of what it was like. None of this rose tinted glasses. But one of the things that came out of it is the importance of leadership, and a lot of the people in there were talking about the fact that when they were going over the trenches and they were going over the sort of the front line to attack the Germans or whatever, and they had people from both sides. It wasn't just the English in there, it was also the German soldiers' accounts. And the importance of leadership was crucial, because there was a lot of the problems where people were saying that, yeah, we're going to go and fight this war, try and take this piece of ground in no man's land, and they were just sending people to their deaths, and the officers were they were leading from the rear. And the difference was, you could see some of the people who were held in high regard were some of the leaders who were like, right, pretty much they were going to their deaths. They knew it, but they were straight over the top. And the sense of the rallying of the troops, the sort of increase in morale, and the idea that they knew the realisation, but the people, they went over the top, and it was amazing hearing some of the accounts of the bravery and actually how it made the men more inspired, because the opposite, where they had some of them, the leaders disappearing when the artillery came down on top of them, that actually reduced morale and all that sort of stuff. So it was fantastic, the sense of leadership and importance. And the reason I mention it is nothing like those sort of horrific times, but you can just see that now that we lack leadership of any kind, and when there is uncertainty, and look, do you know what, we've made a decision, we're going to leave Europe. It's not the end of the world by any stretch, but now we've made it, we're going to do it anyway. We're going into the unknown, into the no man's land, so we need somebody to say, look, this is the plan, because the worst thing is in any circumstance is not having a plan. But anyway, slight aside, it will be, if you have a chance, go and download the book off Amazon. It's probably only a couple of quid, but it is, even if you're not interested in war or anything like that, it's one of the most fascinating things you'll ever read. But anyway, we're not a historic podcast, we're a money podcast.
No, we are, and as we are a money podcast, while you're on Amazon, download Damien's book, The 30-Day Money Plan.
Yeah, the 30-Day Money Plan, indeed. Actually, I've just done an update on the 30-Day Money Plan, because part of the point of the 30-Day Money Plan was that I wanted to be able to, it'd be pretty timeless, and it's very hard to write a book that is going to sort your finances in 5 minutes a day, that you can release and it doesn't age or date. And so one of the things I did was, in the introduction there, within the book, was to give people an ability to sign up to an email list where you would get updates and chapter updates and any sort of revisions that went on. So actually the book, even though it was published 2 years ago, is still just as relevant and up to date as it ever was. And so it's quite timely you mentioned it, Andy. So go and download the book, sign up to the list, and you'll get all the latest updates. And I've done that this week. I've just changed a couple of the chapters. Interestingly, very few changes, but just maybe one or two different tweaks to some of the tools. But yeah, go download the plan. If you leave a review of this podcast, I will actually give you a copy of that book free. So you'll hear the outro at the end that promotes it, but basically go to moneytothemasses.com, click on podcast at the top, and you will see the details of how to claim your free book once you leave us a review.
And for any new listeners out there, it's just a few pounds, and I guarantee you'll get that money back in the first couple of chapters. I did, and I haven't looked back, so good stuff. Right, what have we got coming up? We kind of flew right into that bit because we were talking about change and Britain and this, that and the other. How are you doing anyway, my friend? How's the last week been for you?
I'm actually really excited to be doing the podcast. They probably do realise that I'm a bit like a kid in the sweet shop. I get excited about these things, especially when you and I have had a mini break, because people are probably, they will realise, everybody waits by their iPhone, don't they, on a Sunday morning, Andy?
Well, we like to think so.
I know. Waiting for the Money to the Masses podcast to drop into their phone. But we didn't do one last week, and that was because Andy, bless him, decided he needed a break. But obviously, we talked about it the week before, and deservedly so. But we had a bumper Brexit special, so I thought people...
Can I just say, it's not a break from the podcast, it was just a general break, like a holiday.
Yeah.
It's not like I was getting bummed out by the podcast and thought, I really need a break from this.
No.
Just a general break, a holiday.
Yeah, so we had a mini break, but I've come back and with a vengeance, and there's been some interesting developments in the last couple of weeks. And one of the things that I want to talk about is property funds, commercial property funds. If you think you don't invest, this is still relevant to you, because there's been a real something that hasn't happened since the financial crisis. So that's how important and relevant this is. And I want to talk about a Brexit scam that's going on.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, see, these fraudsters, as soon as there is something they can take advantage of, they will. I want to touch upon 80/20, some summer money tips. I've been asked a lot about summer money tips by journalists. There's a theme they always do every year, so I'm going to chuck in a few of those. And anything else we happen to talk about on the way. But before I start, I just want to promote somebody else's podcast, because this week I was moonlighting, Andy. You're not the only person. I have to break it to you. I was unfaithful. I was interviewed on a podcast called Informed Choice Radio, and you'll find it in the investing charts on iTunes. And I was interviewed about effectively me, Money to the Masses, this podcast, my views on things, 80-20, the 30-day money plan. So it was a real insight into Money to the Masses and how it all came about and everything like that. So many of you may have heard it, but we've had so many new listeners of late. The charts have gone crazy with our podcast. So anybody who wants to know the full back history of what's happened, listen to it. It's really interesting. We cover some good topics.
So not only did you cheat on me, you recorded the evidence of cheating on me too. Unbelievable.
And I'm going to play it back for you. Yeah, I'm telling you. I almost feel like I'm gloating. Yeah, apologies, Andy. So yeah, we're going to go. Should we go straight into the property stuff?
Commercial property, yeah, I've seen a lot of it in the news. I haven't really digested it because I thought it didn't affect me, but you're going to tell me otherwise. So what's going on?
Right. The news came out probably in the last week or so. So where are we? We're in July. So if you listen to this podcast in the future, this is still relevant to you because what happened? There was the FTSE and the other equity markets. Everything seemed to be picking back up again after the referendum, and people feeling a little bit more happy, a little bit more settled. Certainly all the panic had seemed to evaporate from the market. Then there was all of a sudden the news broke that a commercial property fund, now that to most people they'll just think property funds generally only invest in commercial stuff. So we're talking the office blocks that you probably work in, the factories people listening to this are working in, anything that when you say commercial property, not residential, not your house, we're talking about big offices. Shopping centres are often owned by property funds because they have billions of pounds of money to invest. And what happened, Standard Life, which runs pretty much the biggest property fund in the UK, which is billions of pounds in size, said that investors couldn't have their money out. And the world went into a bit of a meltdown. It wasn't just in the UK. The equity markets wobbled in the UK. They wobbled abroad. It just all suddenly there was a sense of panic and a deja vu. Now, I want to explain, first of all, why it happened, sort of look into the idea, the sort of precedents in history and what people can do about it. Now, why it happened is quite interesting. Commercial property, okay, is where you buy, like say, office blocks. And so a fund manager will go out and he'll buy the various offices in the city or factories and stuff like that. And when you buy a fund, you can buy and sell units within that fund, if it's a unit trust, as and when you want. And what happens is that if the number of people who decide they want to sell your fund and want to leave it and want their money back exceeds the people who are actually trying to buy into the fund by a large amount, so it exceeds that, you start getting to the point where you can have issues if you don't have enough cash within the fund. And don't forget that these managers are supposed to be investing your money. They don't want to sit on huge piles of cash because you'd quite rightly say, well, what are you doing with my money? You're not actually doing anything. But it's quite difficult, and if not nigh impossible, just to sell an office. You can't decide, okay, we've got a lot of people want their money back, I'll just sell this chunk of this office. You have to sell the whole thing. And when you're talking about offices, it can be like hundreds of millions of pounds. So what happens is you get to a point where the fund, and they're allowed to do this under the rules that the FCA stipulate. They're allowed to say, whoa there everybody, stop panicking, you can't have your money back. And just shut up shop. And basically, you're stuck. You can't have your money back. And that's what Standard Life did. And that sent a bit of a shockwave through the rest of the property market and equity markets. And this is why it starts to impact other people. Because the reason it starts to, well, if you can't have your money back in any sort of area of life, not just investing, people start to panic, don't they? And the last time this occurred was in the financial crisis back in 2008. And we all know what happened then. So it was a bit of a deja vu. Is the world ending? Are we going to have another banking crisis, financial crisis? So what happened is other funds started to follow suit because there started to be a bit of a run on these things. Not a run as such that everybody wanted their money out, but people became nervous. Because what's happened is that last week, so we were talking that after the referendum, people started pulling their money out of property funds. And the reason they did is because the idea being that if we're not in the EU, then a lot of foreign investors were going to be put off buying, they're placing their headquarters here. So we're talking about large companies, not just rich oil barons or anything like that. So you could have big companies decide, you know what, we're not going to have our headquarters in London. We're going to end up having it in Paris or stuff like that because they want to be in the European Union. So that puts a lid on the demand. And in fact, the demand started to tail off. And we started to see this ahead of the referendum. And I had a chat with a commercial property fund manager before the referendum was just chatting about the sort of asset class as it was. And I think I may have touched upon it in a podcast previously. And they were of the opinion, yeah, people have been taking money out ahead of the referendum. A bit nervous, but we're not going to exit. So what will happen is it will flood back in. Of course, that didn't happen, did it? So what ended up happening is it accelerated the amount that people wanted to take out. So suddenly we were in a position where people were worried. There was going to be a less demand. So the prices, if you wanted to sell your office, you were going to be selling at what they would call it a distressed valuation. So everybody wanted to pull their money out. We'd got settled after the referendum. Then suddenly, when Standard Life said, yeah, do you know what? We're having loads of people pulling their money out. They can't. We're going to just put a lid on it. All the other property funds that were big and are unit trust, now I'll come on to why that's important, started to close up shop. There'll be people listening to this podcast who probably don't even realise that their property fund they're in won't give them their money back if they want it. And now, just a very quick, this is a bit of a lesson for anybody out there investing. You sometimes hear things called unit trust, investment trusts and ETFs, exchange traded funds. Now, very quickly, a unit trust, the way that is different to the other two, is that a unit trust or an OIC is an open-ended fund. And what that means is that if a fund manager, like a property fund manager, has all his money in a pot and he's buying offices, if somebody wants to invest in that fund, they will just say to him, sort of, oi, fund manager, I want to invest. And he goes, of course you can. And he creates, effectively, shares or units, as they're called, for them to invest. Or if the person who's already in the fund says, oi, fund manager, I want to leave, he'll go, yeah, no problem, I'll give you money back. And then he cancels those shares. And that's very different to what happens in, you imagine, with investment trusts and ETFs, which trade just like shares. What happens is if you don't want them anymore, like if you held a share in any company, you just sell them to somebody else. Unit trusts don't work like that. You sell them back to the manager themselves. So what happens is that when you if you want to suddenly exit, the fund manager is at the point where he's suddenly thinking, well, I've got to give these people their money back. I'm going to have to sell stuff. And of course he can't. If it was an investment trust, they would just go, well, they wouldn't actually have to sell anything because people would just trade the shares on the open market. You can't do that with unit trust. So what we've got is a brilliant example of why a unit trust structure is not that great for illiquid assets, so things you can't sell very quickly. So where we had a rush for the exit all at once, the fund managers had to make a decision. Do I give these people their money back and actually effectively penalise those people who are going to stay with us? Because suddenly they're going to have to take the hit, aren't they? Because you give their people their money back. The people in the fund are left invested in properties that are probably worth a lot less if they suddenly have to sell them. So what they did is, as I said, stop people leaving or just wrote down the values of those funds by about 20%. Now, there were 7 key funds that were all unit trusts that did this. And that was the issue that suddenly caused a big shockwave. The markets, like I say, equity markets sold off, so that's why it matters to even you, Andy. It also had a knock-on effect to the general property market because it made people nervous about if offices and commercial property is not going well, then could that mean there's going to be an increase in defaults? If there's an increase in defaults in office blocks and rentals, then that can actually have a knock-on effect to the people who lend the money and banking systems, and of course then that will all spill on. So it does matter to people.
Yeah, sure.
So I was asked by quite a number of journalists, what do we do? I mean, what's the outlook? And funnily enough, I saw lots of other so-called experts in the industry being quoted in the papers as well. And most of them were saying, oh, the fund managers have overreacted. I think it's outrageous what they're doing and locking people into their investment funds. The problem is that going back to, again, a podcast we did on how to read the newspapers, where we said to people, when you read stories, you've got to learn sort of how to interpret them. The people who were making those quotes were people who'd actually recommended those very funds. So they suddenly got lots of clients ringing them up saying, I want to get out of this fund, and they're being told, no, they can't, and then they're saying, well, why did you recommend it? Did you not know this would happen?
Yeah.
So therefore, they're going to be in the papers blaming the fund manager and saying they're overreacting. Reality is they weren't, because it's a simple case. If more people want to go out the exit than actually want to come in, it's a bit like if there's a fire. If you're standing in a building, there's a fire, and everyone goes to the exit. Not everyone can leave at once, so they've got to stop. They've got to do something to sort of stop the panic. So what do we do now? This is for people who are in commercial property funds. If go and have a look to see if you're in one, double check what's happened. Because I say there's 7 of them that have closed the doors. The biggest ones, Standard Life, Threadneedle, Aberdeen have done it, I think, as well. And some of them have actually just reduced the value of it. So if you go, they've not said you can't have your money back, but you can have it back and you lose 20%. So what do? What's likely to happen is they're going to review each of these decisions within every sort of month or so. And I would say, based on history, if you go back to 2008, when we had the crisis and property funds closed, after about a year, nearly all of them were back open again. So it could be that if you just wait out, you will actually be okay, because they'll reverse their decisions of either shutting you in or that sort of 20% discount. They may actually remove that. So if you're in there, you're stuck. But if you're not, and if you're in a fund and it's been written down, you might want to wait. I'm not saying it won't get any worse. I don't think we're in 2008 because we're not quite got the banking crisis or anything like that yet. So I don't think it's the same scenario. But again, like I say, the knock-on effect for everybody is it makes a difference because it's going to have an impact on the property market and for residentials and that sort of stuff. Because in time, if people are nervous, then what will happen is they won't want to move, etc. I do think that it's probably been slightly overdone, if I'm going to give an opinion on this, because one of the other things that's happened at exactly the same time is the pound's devalued. So let's just imagine, Andy, me and you were rich. Okay, we can dream.
Hang on a minute, it's going to take a lot of imagination. Let me just fire up the brain cells. Yeah, okay, I'm there.
I'm there. So let's just say you and I run a company and we're going to buy an office. And if you think before the referendum, the price of that office was, let's just say, going to be £100 million. Well, now the pound has devalued so much that you're going to get that property 10-12% cheaper just purely on a currency valuation. Now, if you take into effect that they're going to probably need to sell the property at a discount anyway to try and sell it, because if they want to, if a fund is having to seriously sell assets, so they're going to have to sell a building, they're going to have to sell it at a knockdown price, you're going to start getting a bargain. And so suddenly there is going to be a flaw to this, because foreign investors will go, do you know what? We actually wanted an office block in London, but now we can get it 10-20% cheaper than we could have done a month ago. And they might have been teetering on a decision and it might push them over the edge. Of course, we're probably not going to be in the European Union much longer, so there is going to be that implication that they might need their offices in Paris. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom. What tends to happen, actually, and this is one we can come back on in the future to see if I was right, and you can just beat me up if I wasn't. What tends to happen is retail investors are very late to the party on nearly everything. So that I'm talking about DIY investors. They panic. But just at the point they panic, the people who have lots of money, the professionals, what they do is they see the opportunity and they'll wade in. So we could almost get to the point where you're in the turning point in the market in a not too distant future, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah. Interestingly, have you got any investments that were in commercial properties, or were you? Have you ever been in them?
I'll tell you what, Andy.
Did you pull out before you went?
I'll tell you what, Andy. I love the way you put me on the spot because, do you know what? The truth is, I do have an affliction, which is modesty, Andy. So it's good you draw these things out of me. 80/20 Investor, that's the DIY investing service that I run. Now, ahead of Brexit, about in May, I held a small chunk in one of the property funds and I sold out. And that was because the algorithm that's behind 80/20 Investor just basically said ditch it. And so I did. And I held that in my 50k portfolio. So I'm not in them. I sold out before all this happened. So yes, I could sit here and be quite smug about the idea that I'm no longer in there. But actually, in truth, commercial property had already lost its attraction because they've made loads of money. They've made double-digit sort of returns in the last year or two. And that isn't typical for a property fund annually to make double-digit returns. It's normally a couple of %. And so I'd already got out for that reason. So yes, I'm sitting here. I was in it as recently as May. So listen to this podcast, that's 2 months ago. But I got out ahead of the curve. So I do look like...
You're a bit of a I told you so kind of merchant now at the moment, but that's fine.
So I don't want to appear as an I told you so. But all the people who are on 80/20 Investor who follow what I do are pretty chuffed. So I am terrible at singing my own praises. Do you know what it is, Andy? I despise people who just sing when they're winning. And
we should meet before the podcast, and you should write it all down for me and just get me to read it out.
Yeah, I should do. Ask me these questions. Everybody who listens to this podcast, get on your phone, because you're going to be on Facebook anyway while you're listening to me drone on. Go to our Facebook page, Money to the Masses, and at the very top of that page, you will see a video. We created a video to show what would have happened if you'd followed 80/20 Investor and what I've been doing for the last 16 months. Because remember, I run a live portfolio of £50,000 on there. And there's an animation to show what would have happened if you'd invested in the FTSE 100, the average managed fund, if you'd invested your money with Neil Woodford, who's, as everybody tries to convince you, he's the equivalent of Jesus or some immortal soul, such a legend. If you'd bought passive funds, and if you'd done what I'd done on 80/20 Investor. Now, shall I do I lead you up the list, shall I, Andy?
Yeah,
I'm going to anyway, so you might as If you'd invested in the, like I say, go and watch the animation. It's quite cool. I didn't make it. Somebody made it for me. If you'd invested in the FTSE 100, you would have actually been down, despite the rally in markets, you would have been down exactly 1.57%. Now, if you'd gone in the average managed fund, you'd have been up 2.63. Neil Woodford, up 2.75. Now, the passive portfolio is up 6.25. Now, these are funds run by Vanguard, who are enormous. And now, that's the problem with fund managers. They struggle to outperform passive investments over time. But I finished up 11.1%. So I'm up 11.1% in the time the FTSE's down, what was it? What did I say? About 1.5%. So I'm chuffed. I mean, I have to say, in the grand scheme of things that I've achieved in life, I'm really pleased with that, because there are people who've been writing to me who follow what I do, and I'm not rich. I don't have lots of money to invest. I just understand money and the way it works. And to hear other people making lots of money and very happy and all that sort of stuff is wonderful. Of course, it's easy to sing when you're winning, and it's not always going to be plain sailing. But over that period of time, we've had lots of market dips. We've had China blow up at some point, not literally, but their economy have issues. We've had Greece almost exiting Europe, and then we've had us doing it. We've had so many problems, and we managed to do that. So I'm really pleased. I'm glad you asked me that, Andy. So it is a bit of a promo for 80/20 in there, and I shouldn't be so modest, I think.
The thing is, yes, you are singing when you're winning, but you're one of the only ones, if not the only one out there, who's happy to present their portfolio 100% of the time, and you can see pretty much live what's happening, and you don't hide from it. There are a lot of people out there in the industry that go very, very quiet when things are going bad. You're quite happy to sort of, put it out there and explain why it is what it is, and the fact that you're very confident in how and why it will change. And obviously, if you want more information into the background of that happens, you need to be an 80/20 member. But Damien does give sort of brief updates and snippets to the wider world and the press and everything on why his 80/20 process works, and it is bloody amazing.
But we actually got featured in the Times. They actually printed some of the... I said to you, the Wall Street Journal interviewed me the week before. The Times asked me about the stuff as well, I think this week. And yeah, it's good to get it out there. And it's just because I want to try and give people, empower people, give them solutions. Because the issue I have with the industry is that there are lots of commentators, and people could say, yeah, I am one of them. I am one of these talking heads. It's easy to go in the paper and just say, oh, you should buy this fund. There's no comeback. I mean, it doesn't matter. If you get it wrong, you just get abusive comments at the bottom. So they don't, do you know what I mean? It can be almost, they're not flippant, but there's no, like you say, no comeback. And to actually do something and start on a day, and when I started, it was at the top of the market, and say, look, I'm going to do this and do it live. Yeah, I could have finished with egg on my face. And who's to say that in the future we're going to have good times and bad times? But it's teaching people that all you've got to do is try and get more right than you get wrong. And that's what I love about it. So that's why I'm so pleased. And we're getting a lot of coverage about 80/20 Investor, because the PR are slowly picking it up. And actually, it's the second anniversary of when I first started running it very soon. So perhaps I will venture out and poke a few journalists to talk about it a bit more openly. But yeah, if you have a free trial, I'll give away a free trial if you're into DIY investing and you could learn something.
Okay, Damien, back to scams again, and it's Brexit this time that's causing the scammers to get all sort of excited. What's going on?
Right, the thing with scammers and fraudsters, you despise them, but there is a part of you that you don't admire it, but their ingenuity and their ability to adapt what they do is quite incredible, to be honest. So what's happened now is the whole scenario about the Brexit vote has given them a massive opportunity. And the reason there's an opportunity because people are nervous and people are the sense that they don't know what's going on and the sense of panic, which again isn't helped, jumping all the way back to what we talked about at the beginning of this very podcast. The sense of loss of control, that people don't know what's going on, the lack of leadership. People will just they'll head towards anything if people dangle them something and say, look, you need to panic about this, or here's that an answer, or something like that. So fraudsters know this and they've just latched onto it. So the scam that's been going around is that people have been receiving emails or messages via social media saying, look at this, the market's going to crash, or the market has crashed, this is what you need to do. So playing on people's fear this time about what's happening with the markets, and we could be with property prices. And then what they do is giving the people a link or something to download that's going to solve the problem or tell them about this issue that's coming. They then, it's the old phishing scam. They end up downloading a piece of rogue software, malware, or whatever you want to call it, and it ends up on their PC. So not only does it serve them up all those dodgy adverts, but it actually logs the keys they press, so therefore tracks the passwords and usernames for anything they want to log into online. So be aware if you see anything that is talking around these things. It's that people who talk a lot on social media about Brexit and things like that seem to be targeted quite often. But with a lot of these scams, it's just blanket. And if people who, unfortunately, the elderly always get targeted in these things. I just hope the fact that probably some of the very elderly aren't online, which is a slightly disappointing thing, but they won't see some of it. But there's probably lots of this stuff offline anyway. So the message is anything surrounding the Brexit where somebody comes along and gives you either advice or something to worry about, unless it's me or Andy, then you just need to ignore it and just delete it. Don't click on any links, because you're probably going to end up downloading something and which will enable them to either steal your identity or indeed your money.
Good, timely warning. What have we got next?
Right, we're going to close on this one. Again, a journalistic piece that I was asked to do, and I just think it's quite nice and light thing to finish the podcast on, and it's summer tips. Now, there's always a cycle in the way the newspapers are written. Again, in that podcast about how to read the money sections, I explained how the journalists work. And when people like me contribute to their money pages, they write the same things almost every year. They go around in a cycle. So this time of year, they'll probably do a money piece on things to do this summer ahead of the autumn or winter to save you money. I mean, the reason I know that you're doing it this year, because I've been asked, but I was also asked the same thing last year. So it just goes round in cycles. So it makes the job easier for commentators like me, because I've already probably done the same comments a year before. So just a quick fire thing here for people. The biggest one is get your boiler serviced. I mean, during the summer months, the people like British Gas, if you have any of those home care agreements or whatever they are, you get a free annual service anyway of your boiler. But of course, those guys are very quiet in the summer because no one thinks about their boilers. So book your appointment in for the servicing of your boiler, so when you crank on the heating in the autumn, it doesn't blow up. Apparently, you should turn on your heating once a month anyway in the summer. I never knew this, but it's the valves and things seize up if you don't, or they've got more chance of seizing up, should I say, if you don't. So you should turn it on. Like I say, get it serviced. The other thing is, do look to switch your energy bill, because what happens is people, this tip I've actually mentioned once before, I think, but lots of new listeners, they won't have heard it. If you you should actually look at your energy bills during the summer, because lots of people, they do deals that go across winters. So they do 1 winter or 2 winters they'll fix for. Well, you then drop off that and end up on your utility firm's expensive standard tariff during the summer, and therefore they launch new ones around now. So go and do that, have a look around. And the final thing is to have a look at the things that are cheap to buy this time of year, and as you head into the autumn and stuff like that, because there are lots of things that you would need, say in the winter, that you can pick up at a discount now. So whether it's, I don't know, things like antifreeze or all that sort of stuff, but you can actually get much bigger things, because as you go into the autumn, it's the cheapest time to buy garden furniture. It's the cheapest time to buy some electricals now in the summer, because people don't tend to buy laptops and things like that. But having said that, you probably get some good deals on things like TVs ahead of major Olympics and all that sort of stuff we had, and the useless Euros we just watched. So again, there's seasonality in things you buy.
Good. Okay. Well, I'm off to buy a winter coat on that advice. Actually, near where I live, we've got an outlet centre in Ashford, and it's always good walking around those shops because it's everything that's out of season, basically, and you get some blooming good deals. So, yeah, why not? I'll get my winter coat.
You say that in terms of like the most useless money tips in the world. I saw one on the telly the other day, and they were actually mocking it, and the point was, you know, about the 5p bags. So they had to save money, avoid the 5p bag charge. And I forget which programme I was watching, and they were like laughing at it. And the money advice in one of the papers, I remember looking at it thinking, God, I hope it wasn't me who said it. It wasn't, but it was. It was. Take your own bag to the supermarket to avoid the 5p charge. At which they actually pointed out that is the point of the 5p. That's not money saving advice, and it tickled me. So yeah, buy clothes, fill your boot full of winter clothes just when you don't want them. So yeah, just as pointless. But
little money saving tip: don't rev your engine at the lights. It costs petrol.
Is that what you do? I remember seeing a program where I think it might be Martin Lewis, you know, and they did braking. Braking actually uses petrol because the brake itself doesn't, but it's the idea that you're able to sort of slow down and speed back up
and then have to re-accelerate.
Yeah, and acceleration is what they use petrol doing that. So they actually had somebody who was trying to drive and not brake, and it did save them petrol. But some of the money saving tips that exist out there I find quite incredible. And people who listen to this podcast know I'm not the kind of guy to cut the top off wellies and turn into flower pots. I'm not knocking anybody who does.
I've got a lovely little story to finish the pod. Talking of braking, I'm not sure if I've ever told you. I certainly don't think I've told it on the pod. My wife once got pulled over by the police for a broken brake light. And she was panicking. She's a teacher. She was on the way to school. She was worried about taking the registration. And they pulled her over. And they said, do you know why we've pulled you over? And my wife panicked and said, no, I haven't got a clue. He said, well, you've got broken brake lights. In fact, both of them at the back, they're not working. She said, oh, that's strange. They seem to be working yesterday on my husband. Anyway, so he said, no, go on. So the police officer got my wife to test them. He said, oh, that's strange. They seem to be working fine. And then they worked out that actually he'd been following my wife for almost 2 miles and she hadn't pressed the brake once. And she'd gone over the crest of hills. She'd gone over roundabouts. She'd taken junctions. Now, I didn't know. I mean, the police officer actually congratulated her on her driving and actually said, well done. Basically, you've proved that you're driving in the right spirit. You're not having to constantly brake and accelerate, which is the best way of driving. But I did ponder whether that was, a good thing or a bad thing. That the fact that she's gone literally over hills, she's gone through, traffic lights, she's taken on junctions and not once pressed the brake. I mean,
yeah, I don't know whether that is a good thing actually, Andy.
Yeah, so well done, my wife. Instead of getting a ticket, she got a pat on the back and a congratulations. Although, on the flip side of that, she did once get a speeding ticket on our wedding day, as she was speeding to the hairdressers to get her hair done. So, swings and roundabouts. Right, we're done. We've had some cracking reviews this week. Didn't we get a request from someone to read?
Yeah, I think there was somebody. There was. Somebody wrote in and said to me, "Why don't you read the reviews out? You should do. Other podcasts read their reviews." And
did they really, or is this just your underhand way of
trying to pretend I'm not modest? No, they did generally, Andy, and they said that people like to. Do you know what? The reason we don't is we took a kind of a decision that patting yourself on the back was.
I was a little uncomfortable with it. I think you were too. You've always been quite modest, and reading out praise is. Yeah, I find it a bit uncomfortable.
But actually, do you know what? We've had some good ones. I mean, some of them, I'm just looking at them here. I said that I'll read them. Excellent podcast, very informative. I've just subscribed over the weekend and already thoroughly catching up on past episodes. But the guys are genial, informative, and the subject matter is easy to understand, even for a novice of 40 years like me. Keep up the good work and the banter, Andy.
#bants.
Yeah, I mean, I also get emails from people who are saying they love the podcast and discover it. So it's been brilliant. I actually last time I was on the podcast, I said to people, go onto the 80/20 Investor sign up page, and you can talk on the click the chat button that pops up and says, "Can I help you?" And it does go straight through to me. And I told the story of the guy who got in touch with me as I was about to have a certain medical procedure. Yeah, and since I told that story,
which we discovered was up, not down.
Exactly, Andy. and since I told that story, I've had some slightly odd conversations on that chat window. So the more the merrier, I have to say. People asking me all sorts of questions. I think, interestingly, seem to have become Google.
Good stuff, Damien. Loved it as always. Until next week.
Until next week, Andy.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.